In this video, I'm going to walk through how to use the Arpeggiator step sequencer in Zebra 2. And I have the initialize patch loaded right now, and behind this I have a MIDI clip right now, just one note being held, and I will expand on this as we go through the video. But for now, what I'd like to do is just show you how to set this up. First thing we're going to do is go to the global, and if I play this MIDI clip, okay, it sounds like what we would expect, all right? The initialize patch and a single note being held. To enable arpeggiation, what we want to do is set the voice mode to Arpeggiator. And now when I play this note, okay, we hear sort of an arpeggiation sequence being played. So let me go to the Arpeggiator window and let me just play the note. All right, and the way this works is right now the arp sync is set to 1/4, and that means each step, each vertical column that you see over here represents one step. It's called a step if you're not familiar with step sequencers. Each one of these steps represents a duration of time that corresponds to this arp sync. So in this case, each step represents 1/4 note. If I changed it to 1/8, now each step represents 1/8 notes. And so if I play it, and you can ignore this section over here, even though it looks like when the lights go by, it looks like it continues on over here. This is actually a separate area, and this allows us to modulate parameters based on the values in these steps. And I demonstrate that later in this video. For right now, I want you to just focus on this section here, okay? So the number of steps that are in the loop, right now it's set for 16. So you saw the light for each step light up all the way across. I can change that to, let's say, 4 steps. So now only these first 4 steps are being used. And for the rest of this video, I'm probably just going to leave it at 4, just to demonstrate the different concepts. Now, let me talk about what the controls are for each row here. And the first one I'm going to look at is this transpose control. This represents the pitch of the note that will be played when it gets to this step, okay, in the sequence. So if I wanted to, let's say, set up alternating octaves, I could leave this first step at 0, set the next one to 12, so then that would go up 1 octave. Then the next one would be back at 0, and 0 would correspond to whatever MIDI note is being played. So in this case, I'm playing A2. So then it would start with A2, then it would go up to A3, back to A2, and then if I wanted to go up to A3, I could do that again. So now let's play this. And in fact, one thing I want to do is set this octave here to 0 for a moment. And I'll explain what that does in a minute. But for right now, having that at 0 causes these particular transpose values to be used for selecting the pitch of the note at that step. All right, so voices, this is the number of notes that can play during that step. So right now I'm only holding 1 note down. If I held 2 notes down, so let me play an A and a D, it's still only 1 voice. But if I set this to 2, in fact, let me set all of them to 2, we now hear this interval being played. In fact, let me put a filter in here. Alright, so now the gate parameter, that controls the duration of the note within the step. Okay, so if the step is 1/8, then this gate is relative to that sync amount. Alright, so for example, if I set the sync to 1/4, then this gate amount of 2 would be longer compared to if my sync was 1/8. Okay. So not only are the steps progressing on the quarter note, but the gate amount is scaled, if you will, so that it takes up basically 2 parts, if you will, of that 1/4 note. Now what that is exactly in the duration, not sure. 0 would be extremely short. 1 would be a little longer. 2 a little longer. 3 a little longer than 2. And then let's go ahead and make it 5 steps. Set this gate to 4. And in fact, let's make it 6 steps. And set this gate to 5. And I'll explain what that is in a second. But let's just listen to these. Okay, so that ends up actually playing until the next step. It holds it for the full duration. And this has a special connection with, if I switch over to the global, when glide is being used. In fact, let me increase the cutoff frequency, and I'm going to, for a moment, just play one note in the MIDI clip. And I'm going to set the steps back to 4, and I'll demonstrate what that 5 does for the gate. Now what that does is it plays it, it actually connects it to the next step. If I set this slide to on, it'll actually achieve a portamento effect only on notes that are connected to the next step. The other ones will be gated as if we aren't using glide at all. So you can hear that glide down from step number 2 to step number 3. In fact, I'll make both of these shorter. Okay, those are 2, and I'm going to make this one 2. Now if I wanted to glide up from step 3 to step 4, let me change this to 2 and set that one to 5. So now this note is connected to the next one, so it will glide into the next one. So you can hear it gliding up from the lower note up an octave to the higher note. Okay, so that takes care of explaining the gate. And then the length is a multiple of the arp sync value here. So for example, 1 would mean it's 1/4. 2 would mean it's 1/2. This first note is a half note long. If I do 3, then it's 3/4. And then 4. By default, the length is always set to 1. So in the default state, each step would be whatever your arp sync value is. If you wanted to vary that, for example, you wanted one step to be, a whole beat long, then you could change this to 4, and it would be 4 times 1/4, which would give us a whole note, or it would actually be 4 beats long. And that's synchronized to whatever the project tempo is here. Okay, so that takes care of the length, and then the final parameter is the step one, and this is kind of interesting and somewhat unpredictable. Okay, internally, the notes that are going to be played in the arpeggiation sequence are based on which notes are being played, what your octave set is here, whether it's 0, 1, or 2, and that's really it. That pretty much defines the notes that will be played. So if I said A and I play the A, in fact, if I don't do any transpose, let's check that. Okay, so it's playing the same note each time, all right? If I set the octave to 1, and with that, let me get rid of that glide. And so now they all have the same gate value. They all have the same length value. They all have the same transpose. The only thing different, in fact, let me set them all to 1 note for this demonstration. The only thing different right now is this octave has been set to 1. So let's hear what that sounds like. What happens is, and notice we don't have any transpose, so the question is, why is it going up one octave? In fact, it's alternating. And so what this octave does is it repeats the arpeggiation sequence 1 octave higher or 2 octave higher, okay? Depending on what it's set to. So let me see if I can set this up to demonstrate. I'm going to play an A and an E at the same time, and let's hear how that sounds. And if you notice, you should be able to count 4 different pitches. There's the A2 and the E3. Let me move this to the side a little bit. And then what's happening, this octave 1 means take these notes and move them up an octave and repeat the pattern. So it plays the A2 on the first step, the E3 on the second step, the A3 on the third step, and then the E4 on the fourth step. All right? If we said 2 here, then we would get another copy of these 2 notes played 1 octave, well, actually 2 octaves higher. Okay? And so the sequence would be A2, E3, A3, E4. That would be the first 4 steps. And then when it comes back around and starts over, it wouldn't drop down to here yet because there's 6 total notes being held down. It would continue and it would play A4, E5. So here we would hear 6 notes for the 6 different pitches for the first 6 steps. So let's see if we can listen and hear that. Okay, let me do it again. A little off here because it's not restarting each time. Let me see if we can get it right. Right, there it started at the bottom. In fact, let's do as played. And remember, we have 2. I set this to 2, so let's go back to 0 first. That way it won't make a copy. So this way we'll get the 6 notes. And let me set this to by note. So when you do by note, it will order them by their MIDI note number. So in effect, you're getting lowest pitch to highest pitch order if you say by note. So here, let me try it again. See how it's retaining the pitch note? It's not starting over each time. That's interesting. That's because of this step. Because it's maintaining internally, it's maintaining its state. So if I said first, it's restarting. This will actually explain what step does. This will be a good demo. So right now my steps are, I've got 4 steps, which are right here. And if I play, it's kind of hard to talk about, right? Because they're using step here. So let me make sure this is very clear. This is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. This step control here determines which note will be played for that step. Okay, whether it's step 1, 2, 3, or 4. Whether it plays the next note in the sequence, the same note, the first note in the sequence, or the last note in the sequence. So if I wanted to, I could say, let's say next. Let me increase my steps to 6, just so we can play all 6 notes. And in fact, I'll say first for this step. That'll guarantee that that step always starts on the first note. And then this will be next, which will be the second one, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth. Okay, let's demonstrate that first. So it'll go right up to here, and then it will repeat. Actually, it'll go to here. Okay, the reason it restarted there is because my MIDI clip looped around and started over. Okay, so you hear 6 different pitches, and it's basically playing A2. In fact, I can play them here. All right, so now the other mode for this step is last. So if we wanted to cycle between the first and the last note, so this would end up playing A2 and then E5 for the first two steps. Okay, and then same plays the same note as the previous step. Okay, and then so we've covered first and last, same and next. So that takes care of that. So we've covered all of these controls. We've covered the steps, demonstrated how the octave works. So this would just end up creating a copy. So if I do one copy, one octave up, that would end up playing these 6 notes, assuming I had enough steps for it. And then it would start one octave higher and repeat the 6 notes, each one octave higher. If I did 2, then it would do it 2 octaves higher. So you can experiment with different settings here. And the only other thing I didn't cover was the ARP loop. So this is the direction that it's going to play notes in, either forward or backward, or forward and then backward, or backward and then forward. So you can experiment with different, let's do backward. In fact, let me go back to 0 here for the octave. Now, what would be interesting, I wonder if step first would be the first note at the front as if it were going forward, or the first note at the back, which would end up being that high note. Let's see what happens. Okay, it is. It's the high note, and then if I change this to forward, then it would be the low note. Okay, and then if we did forward, backward, but remember that this step says first, so that overrides its normal behavior. So I have to say next in order for it to keep looping through that sequence in this forward to backward motion. Let's check that. Okay, and then finally backward to forward. Alright, so I think you get the idea, and we'll be doing a patch where we use this more. That's the high roller patch, and you'll see how this is used in an actual patch programming situation. But I just want to quickly point out the modulator over here. This works similarly to other modulators in that I've got an amount that I can control for each step. So for example, if we wanted to modulate the filter cutoff frequency using the ARP modulator, I can select either ARP mod or ARP mod 2. We have 2 Arpeggiator mod sources we can use. And I could just give it some random values here just for the demonstration purposes, and then set an amount, and then play. And let's speed it up. So that's the basic idea. And you can use this to modulate pretty much anything that can be modulated. And that's it for the Arpeggiator step sequencer. Go ahead and try playing that and experimenting with it and see what kind of arpeggiations you can produce with this tool. I'll see you in the next video.